This is the testimony of a woman who was clinically dead for 11 minutes and came back, describing someone she was never supposed to meet. Her name was Charlotte Holmes. She lived in Wichita, Kansas, and for the last 4 years of her life, she told anyone who would listen the same thing, that death was not the end of her, and that she had the proof. There are a lot of stories like this, enough that it's easy to let your eyes glaze over. The light, the tunnel, the warmth, the peace. You've heard the shape of it before. What makes Charlotte's account harder to wave away isn't any of the usual features. It's one small, specific detail. A face she recognized on the other side that she had no earthly way of recognizing. We'll get to that face. But to understand why it unsettled the people who knew her, you have to start with an ordinary afternoon at a cardiologist's office. In September of 2019, Charlotte went in for what was supposed to be a routine checkup. She had a history of heart trouble, and this was maintenance, the kind of appointment you don't think twice about. Then a nurse took her blood pressure, and the number came back wrong. Not high, catastrophic. 234 over 134. At that level, the body is standing on the edge of a stroke or a heart attack, and the whole room changes in a heartbeat. Someone called a code. People started moving fast. Her husband Danny was there. They had been married for decades, long enough that he could read a room full of medical staff by the way they moved. And he said the way they moved frightened him. He watched them rush in and surround her. He described standing there while the floor seemed to drop out from under him, wondering, in plain and terrible words, whether he was going to be able to bring his wife home at all. And then, in front of him, her heart stopped. For the next 11 minutes, by every measure the machines in that room could take, Charlotte Holmes was gone. No pulse, no pressure. The team worked on her body while her husband waited on the other side of the curtain. And if you have never had to wait like that, understand this. 11 minutes is a very long time. It is long enough that most people who come back from it do not come back whole. It is long enough that somewhere in there, the doctors stop expecting a miracle and start managing a loss. But Charlotte would tell you she was never really in that room for those 11 minutes. As she told it, the first thing she became aware of was that she was above herself. She could see her own body on the table. She could see the people bent over it. She could see the entire scene from a vantage point that made no medical sense at all. This is one of the most commonly reported features of a near-death experience. This sensation of lifting out of the body and watching from above. And researchers have been documenting it for decades. But when it is happening to you, it isn't a statistic in a study. It is the precise moment you understand that you are still you, that your body is somewhere below you, and that the two of you are no longer the same thing. Then, she said, her senses came back, but sharpened past anything she had a word for. A fragrance first. Flowers, she said, more beautiful than any she had ever smelled in her life. Then music, though she could never quite describe what it sounded like. And when she opened her eyes, or whatever it was she was seeing with now, she knew instantly where she was. No one had to tell her. She recognized it in her spirit before her mind could catch up. She struggled to describe the place, the way nearly everyone who reports this struggles. She said whatever she was looking at was so far beyond the reach of ordinary language that any word she reached for would fall short by a factor she couldn't even measure. Everything seemed to move, she said, to sway gently in time with the music, as though the whole place were alive and breathing, and she was not afraid. That was the part she kept coming back to every time she told it. There was no fear anywhere in it, only something she could only bring herself to call joy, complete and without any edges. She described being met. Figures she understood to be angels, and past them, people. People she somehow knew were saints, men and women from long ago. Except none of them looked the way you would expect. None of them looked old. None of them looked sick. None of them wore glasses, or carried the marks of the bodies that had finally failed them. They looked, she said, as though they were in the prime of their lives, made whole again. She recognized them, and she said they recognized her. And then she saw the child. This is the detail that stayed with everyone who ever heard her tell it. Among all those faces, Charlotte saw a young child, a toddler, and she didn't understand it. She remembered thinking, very clearly, in that moment, who is this? It didn't belong. And she said the answer came to her directly and gently, and without any possibility of mistake. This was her child. Years before, Charlotte had lost a baby. She had been 5.5 months pregnant when the pregnancy ended, long enough to have grieved, long enough to have carried the weight of it quietly for the rest of her life, the way that particular loss is carried, in a place most people never see. And now, on the far side of her own death, she said she was shown that child, not as the infant she had lost, as a growing toddler. When she asked how that was possible, how a child who never drew a breath in this world could be standing in front of her, older than the day she lost him, she said the answer she was given was simple. Children keep growing there, because where she was, there is no time. There is only eternity. Stay with that, because this is the thing that lifts Charlotte's account out of the category of a beautiful, comforting story. She did not come back describing a generic paradise that could belong to anyone. She came back describing a reunion with a specific person, tied to a specific, private grief she had been carrying for years. Whatever you believe about what happens when the heart stops, that is not the kind of detail a dying brain hands you at random. It is too personal. It is too pointed. It reached down and answered a question she had probably stopped letting herself ask out loud a long time ago. And then she was told she had to go back. Charlotte was resuscitated. 11 minutes after her heart stopped, it started again, and she came back to a body, and a room, and a husband who had spent those 11 minutes bracing for the worst news of his life. But the woman who came back was not carrying the thing most of us carry without ever noticing it. That low, constant hum of dread underneath everything, about the one appointment none of us gets out of. She had, as she put it, looked death square in the eye, and she was not afraid of it anymore. She would tell you, flatly, that heaven is real, and she said it the way you would tell someone the sun came up this morning, not as a hope she was clinging to, as a fact she had been handed. She spent the rest of her life saying so. She shared her testimony publicly, including on national television, and she never once softened it or trimmed it to make it easier to swallow. For Charlotte, it was never a philosophy or a comfort she had talked herself into on a hard night. It was a memory. She had been somewhere. She had seen someone, and she had been sent back with a message she considered far too important to keep to herself, that the people we lose are not nearly as lost as they feel, and that there is more waiting for us than we let ourselves believe. Now, I could tell you this story as though it settles the matter. It doesn't, and I'm not going to pretend otherwise. Near-death experiences are real, in the sense that they genuinely happen. Researchers estimate that something like 15% of people who survive cardiac arrest report one. They are not rare, and they are not new. One of the earliest carefully documented cases belongs to a young Army private named George Ritchie, who died of pneumonia in December of 1943 and was, by the account of the doctors present, gone for 9 minutes before he came back, profoundly changed. He went on to become a psychiatrist and spent much of his life trying to make sense of what he'd seen. But documenting that these experiences happen is not the same as explaining what they are. Some are certain they are a glimpse of what comes next. Others are just as certain they are the mind's final, extraordinary act as the brain runs out of oxygen. That argument is old, and it is not going to end with one woman from Wichita. But here is what is not up for debate. A woman's heart stopped for 11 minutes. She came back, and she came back describing a child she was never supposed to meet, attached to a grief she had never gotten over. And for the rest of her life, she was not afraid to die. Whatever you make of the first two facts, it is the last one that changes people. It is the one that makes the skeptics in the room go quiet. Because you can argue with an experience all day long. It is much harder to argue with a person who has simply stopped being afraid. Charlotte Holmes passed away in November of 2023 at the age of 72 after a heart attack. She was survived by the husband she had been married to for more than half a century, by her daughter, and by her grandchildren. And if her testimony is true, if she saw what she said she saw, then her death was not a tragedy at all. It was a homecoming. It was the reunion she had already been promised. The toddler she met for 11 minutes was, at last, no longer out of reach. Whatever waits on the other side of that line, this much is certain. The woman who spent 11 minutes there came home, convinced it was worth going back to. And she spent every single day she had left trying to tell the rest of us the same thing. Don't be afraid. There is more, and it remembers your name.